Oh my goodness, I have missed you. Not hanging out last week actually felt kind of odd. It so deeply threw me out of routine. But the love of my life, my son, he was a bit sick, so I was on the routine of waking up every 2 to 3 hours just to take him around the block and make sure that he felt okay, stretch his legs, use the bathroom over and over and over. So my sleep schedule is absolutely demolished due to that, and that's why I'm filming this currently at 3 a.m. It is 3 in the morning. Let's talk the books that I read in October. Why don't we? While I'm up in the middle of the night, I read 19 books in October. And for this wrap up, we're only going to talk about the books that I haven't gone into depth about in other videos. The reason I say that is I have already done a recent disappointments video of the books that I just didn't really get along with this past month. And that included Listen for the Lie, Encyclopedia of Fairies, Heartless, as well as How to Help a Hungry Werewolf. If you just want a good ranty video or any of those books or something that you want to know more about, I will link it in the description box below, or I will link it up somewhere so that you can go jump to that video next if you would like to. So I've already talked about those in depth. Outside of those books, I'm going to tell you everything else that I've read. And I want to start with The Floating World by Axie. Oh, this is a fantasy romance that centers around a bounty for a girl who wields the silver light. And you have a couple of primary characters. Of course, one of those characters is a acrobat who had fled her home, and the girl who wields the silver light, the one that the bounty is placed on. And then you also have an ex-soldier and somebody who doesn't remember their life prior to 2 years ago. And these two collide, and their destinies sort of entangle themselves around each other. And I do remember enjoying this. However, as of this second, I cannot remember a single thing about the story, which is such an odd feeling. And when I experience this, I almost want to remove points from my rating, because in the moment, if I'm like, okay, this is entertaining and nothing is necessarily standing out, that's different than a few weeks after coming to sit down and genuinely not being able to remember a single part of this book. I can't remember a single part of this book. And I hate to say it, but there's a category of story that I feel like so many of them are wrapped up in the folklore of a tale, in the folklore of a land, but the characters feel so similar to one another. I've read quite a few stories that just feel like this one. And I don't want to be that person that says a lot of the Asiatic folklore and a lot of those stories feel the same, because as a culture and as a country, as a space, as a history that holds story and tales, and under no circumstances am saying that Asiatic culture does not have a depth of story and does not hold a depth of storytelling. But what I do want to say is that quite a few of the stories do feel quite similar. And I think it's due to the fact that there is such a lushness to the stories and the culture and the land in which these stories are set that I'm never given much about the characters, but it does feel like I'm coming into these already set spaces, the spaces of Asiatic folklore, and it feels good. It feels nice to be learning about stories and taking myself out of what I'm used to. But at the same time, I do want to say that they blur together for me to a certain degree. I am not saying this because I have anything against these tales, and I'm not saying this because I think any lesser of Asiatic stories. I just think that somewhere in the way that they're shaped, maybe it's tradition to give a little bit less to these people, or maybe they're into the characters themselves, or maybe it's, I don't know. I wish I knew more. If anybody knows like that feeling that I'm getting where they sort of blend together, I'm not saying this correctly, and I'm trying to tread in a way that still expresses the value that I hold for the different cultures and the love that I hold for learning of new cultures, while also still expressing that I am oddly feeling that a lot of the fantasy that we're getting in this specific realm does blur together. Please help me. Please don't cancel me. There is nothing about anything that I'm saying that is saying that this is a lesser story at all. Don't clip my words. I'm so afraid because on the internet, people are looking for reasons to cancel people. And I'm so afraid of being canceled because I say something like that, but it's not meant in that way at all. Do you know what I'm saying? Please tell me you get what I'm saying, because I'm stumbling right now. All that to say, Axie, The Floating World. It was a good time. I think. Can't remember it. I then read A Flame and Fury by Mikayla Bridge. This was a YA fantasy. It is labeled as a fantasy romance romantasy. But the actual romance part of this is such a subplot that I would say don't come into it looking for that romance. Come into this for a romp and for entertainment. This is a story in a world that has phoenix racing, and our main characters are a part of the underdog crew of the Crimson Howlers, who need a new rider. Unfortunately, the only rider available is their rival, Cooper, who is known on the racing tracks as a boy who is always taking too many risks. He puts his bird at risk and he puts himself at risk. It's only about him being flashy and doing what nobody else can, but it's not about care and caution. Without a rider, the only person left is Cooper. However, Calvara loses everything. She loses her aviary and she loses her home to a freak incident with some loose wires. So the Crimson Howlers have to team up with this mysterious tech mogul. And this becomes a story of conspiracies, power, hidden agendas, but you can see where the story is going from a mile away. You can see where the twists and turns are coming from a mile away. It is fairly predictable in that. However, I did have a lot of fun with the actual race elements of it. I wasn't necessarily invested in the romance even, or invested in any of the sly glances and blushing cheeks, but it was really just, I don't think I've read a Phoenix racing story before, and that's kind of what pulled me through, the fact that the novelty of it, I think. So I don't know if I can speak to the actual experience of the writing so much as the novelty of Phoenix racing. It was a romp. It was a good time. I then had a pickup due to cover alone, and that is Hammajang Luck. This is something that I think that is just so horribly marketed, and I don't know if coming into the marketing is the reason that I had the experience that I did, or if I had an extra critical eye because I was being misled. The marketing for it all is that you're getting a Blade Runner meets Six of Crows, a heist for all heists. And it is simply not that. This story opens up with Edie, who has spent 8 years in prison. However, Edie is being let out on parole early, something that they didn't even think that they would get. Stepping out into the parking lot of the prison planet, Edie sees only one car and one person, and that person is the exact same person that sold Edie out 8 years ago. Edie's old best friend. But Edie is unwilling to get back in the game. It wants to live a life without crime from now on. And while Edie gets the ride home from this ex-best friend, Edie says, thank you for the ride, but I'm not getting involved in whatever sort of scams you've got, whatever jobs you've got. I want to be legit and I want to just work. After finding out that they are blacklisted on their home planet, Edie has nothing but giving in and doing one last job. Stealing intellectual property from the biggest tech company in the known solar system. The reason that the marketing sort of let me down on this is this story went, I think it was going for cozy, but in going for cozy in what is a heist novel, it almost invalidated stakes. There were no stakes. I didn't feel the pressure and I didn't feel the time limitations. It was that found family and the themes and the coziness of it essentially slowed it down. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't necessarily think that is bad. However, for me, it just felt so disjointed to have something like a heist be given such a cozy tone. Anytime a climactic point or a problem was reached, it felt easily solved. And I never felt like there was danger in this. I just think that thematically the concept of a heist involves more. So there was a point in my reading experience where I just couldn't quite get a grasp of how this was moving, because I think heist and I think twists, turns, betrayal, keeping an eye on your back. And this didn't give me that. It moved in a very different way. So I don't know if that is actually a problem of the book or a problem of my expectations that I went into it because of all the talk and the marketing of this tale. I've also made my way through a couple of series. The second book for The God and the Gumiho is The God and the Gwisin, and I loved this. Where the first story really set up getting to know my characters, this second book really just sat on soulmates, and it sat on love, and it sat on the soulmate of friendship. I think friendship in this book made my heart so warm. Oh my goodness, it made my heart so warm. Seeing these people come together in lives, in second lives, and loving who this person is, and this idea of love as it passes through lives with one another and different bodies, but still seeing the person. I enjoyed this so much, and it's set on a cruise in the afterlife. It's so good. The actual mystery that's behind this, you've got a god who's been murdered, and you're trying to find who is at the bottom of it. And there is an element where I was invested in that mystery, but I had equal investment in just my characters, and liking them. And I think that actually works in favor of this book. It isn't that I wasn't interested in the mystery. It's just more so that, I don't know, I came to love my characters so much in this story. So they were such a big part of what made me come to the end. And got happy tears. It was just so good. It was so good. I loved how this came about. But the way that the second book ended, I almost think there needs to be another. Speaking of a series that I'm reading because I'm loving my characters, I finished the Naturals series. Now, this is like a YA suspense thriller, and you're getting themes of just murder, mystery, cold cases, procedurals, and I don't want to spoil it, but there's so much in there. Well, not spoiling. I feel like we've all read it by now, right? It's been out forever. Honestly, who cares? Cults and like the underground societies and conspiracy behind it all. I enjoyed this. But again, I want to emphasize, I came to love these characters. I came to love them, getting to know every single person more and more and seeing their background and coming to understand that being a natural is so much of the life that you lived and the traumas you've been through and the empathy that I had out for each character. My gosh, I will not be reading the 5th book. It's like I think it's a novella where you get to see our characters in the future. I see so much hate against that last book, and I don't know if I want that taste in my mouth, so I may be done with this series then. For those of you who do not know what this series is about, there is a program for teens with special abilities, the ability to pick out a lie, to tell lies, to read body language, to read emotion. And this collection of teenagers come together to solve cold cases. They're here to help the FBI with talents because they are naturals at certain things that you just don't come across in everybody. And this story follows the path of a missing mother, missing family members, murder, death, serial killers, and it unravels the drama of each person's family in a way that had me just, it wasn't so much I was there like, oh, I need the drama, as just my heart went out to every person in this team. Even the characters that felt distant at first, I came to love these characters so much. I don't know what sort of drug was in this, but it worked for me. It really did. And it just, something about it just felt like nostalgic to the YA that I used to read. And I don't know what about it did. I can say one thing though. I wish Cassie had ended up with Michael. I think that's what I wanted. I'm not feeling the Dean pairing. I know they're similar and they have the same ability, but something about that pairing I wanted it to be Michael. After I had spent so much time in fantasy and thriller, I wanted something literary just to kind of slow my pace as I was reading. And I read Banal Nightmare by Halle Butler, or Halle Butler. I'm so sorry. I have no idea how to pronounce that properly. This is advertised as millennial literary fiction. You open up with Maddie, who, after living this droll life in the city in an apartment that's too small and recently breaking up with an ex that she maybe thinks could be a good old classic narcissist, Maddie moves back home to the Midwest in town X. It's never given a name. And it just sort of, I would say that this title is very apt. This is such an apt title, Banal Nightmare. It really feels like that. But if I had to sort of try to pick out what the author was doing here, or what the author was sort of focused on in writing this, I would say it would be performance. The performance of empathy, the performance of friendship, the performance of politic and compassion and relationships and romantic connections there, the performative nature of humanity, the almost Alice in Wonderland effect that is self-imposed on perception. I would say that this is one of those books that sort of rides on how unlikable the author can make everybody. And then it sort of becomes this blur of voices that feel almost like over manufactured, if that makes sense. It was just a collection of memes and quotes and references and pop culture almost spewed out in a collage of mess onto the page. The dialogue it did hit points of being horrible to have to intake, and spending time with these characters became horrible. But again, this is one of those books that intends to feel bad. It isn't meant to be a good feeling when reading this. There is a sardonic nature to it. The satire of it all, the realness of it. I think that's what I'm struggling with. It was distasteful and uncomfortable in a very realistic way. If I had to give a tagline to it, it almost feels as if it's saying your 30s aren't your best years. It achieved what it set out to achieve. It's just one of those books that I kind of closed and I was like, okay, now what? It just sort of felt like, all right, now what? What am I supposed to go with this? It didn't necessarily need to give a next step, but I just sort of ended and I was like, it just felt like it was driving down a road to not reach a destination, and it didn't need to reach a destination, and also thinking about the themes, I think it would have been incorrect for it to reach a destination. But in that, I just sort of was like, oh, okay, dang, like, too real. I don't know. It's one of those, like, woman losing it, that subgenre in literary fiction. So if you love that subgenre of litfic, of just a woman barely hanging on, this is going to be the one for you. It does accomplish that successfully. I was then in the mood for a couple of spookier bits, and I read This Faceless Thing We Adore. This is a good old-fashioned story of a woman who gets out of an abusive relationship and goes on a trip to travel and discover herself. And in those travels, comes across a sex-fueled commune that worships an angry god. This story it took cults and it just sort of made it a vibe. I would say that because the nature of this writing feeling so lyrical really gave this a dreamlike, effervescent sort of nature reading it. And I felt woozy and I felt drunken going through this. And often I didn't know what was happening, what was coming next, if I could trust what I was experiencing in this story. And I do think that it very accurately felt like I was losing myself in a story of implied powers and the cult-like nature of faith, just blind faith. This felt like that. And I would say the love and acceptance of being a part of something and healing in that way, because one thing I did struggle with was in our main character coming out of this abusive relationship and in finding herself and in trying to grow, there was an insecurity and a repetition, and it was annoying to be in this character's head often, but I do understand why this character felt the way that she did, and I almost had to exercise compassion and empathy for the way this character interacted and the way that I had to experience beating that drum over and over and over again of insecurity and just wanting to feel a part of something. I would say that this got weird. This is labeled a horror. I wouldn't say it's a horror. However, there are some scenes that were horrific. I would say that this was weird. I would say that the queer elements of it didn't feel primary. The little bit of a jaunt into a queer kiss fest wasn't primary to the story. It is present, but for this to be a queer horror, I just felt like it wasn't a horror and the queer elements were not a center of the story. So don't come into it for that. Don't come into this for answers either. Come into this for the atmosphere of losing yourself to the drunkenness of faith. It was good. It was a different reading experience. I want to say that the rating I gave it was due to the fact that I felt things reading this book that I don't think I felt often. It wasn't just confusion, and it wasn't just, like I said, that wooziness, that dreamlike nature. It felt like something. I don't know if I enjoyed those feelings, and I don't know if I enjoyed this story, but there was something that I felt while reading this that I don't think I've oft felt. I did have a 5-star read this month, and that was Knock Knock Open Wide, which is Irish folk horror. And oh my goodness, this was such a demented read. I think that's the word I want to use. I wasn't necessarily terrified, and I did often feel a sense of confusion, but I want to say that because there were quite a few bodies that you followed through this story, and it was disorienting, but it felt purposefully disorienting. It was disorienting to bounce around, but it made this tale feel like there was a spider web connecting all of these pieces, and I was just sort of following all the connecting gossamer lines into a knot at the center. It felt sort of purposeful in that, and I can say that I was going through it, and I did feel as if I was stumbling and I was tripping as I like sprinted through a dark forest, and I enjoyed this, the folklore of this, the children's TV show at the center of this, the way this bounced around. Aisling as a character, Attain as a character, the love and the relationships built, the flashes from present to past and to other perspectives, this was crafted perfectly. And I struggle to tell you what it's about, but I can tell you the opening scene. Attain is driving down the street on a very rural road, and coming up, sees a body in the middle of the road. As she stops, she sees a dog on top of that body, peeling the skin down off the face. And she gets out and drags this body into her car, smearing the back seat in gore, blood, dirt, mud. Rain is pouring down around her. There are dogs gathering, howling, barking, and Attain pulls away, looking for anywhere to stop, and finds a farmhouse. As she pulls up to this farmhouse and she pulls into this home, she passes out. A husband and wife come to the door. They bring Attain inside, and they bring the body inside. A body that they knew would be in this car. They don't know Attain, but they've struck a deal. Their wants in exchange for a body. And the story goes from there. It's so eerie. Oh, I I loved this so much, and I loved it in a way that I kind of want to go back to the beginning and re-experience the pieces, getting little bits of stories and tales and the characters and the way that people are just sort of unraveling. The story itself unraveled and peeled itself apart, and I'm obsessed. I liked it. I really like this. I kind of want to do, and I want to go back and re-experience it after I just finished and just restart, so that I know where it's going, so that I can see it coming to that point. It's not a long book. If you're looking for something a little demented, spooky, and eerie, this was good. I listened to this on audiobook, and I deeply enjoyed this audiobook narrator. So if you're looking for a good audiobook, I do recommend that. On paper, I did also just sort of sit with a couple of pages so I could just see how the reading experience felt in that sense. Great either way. I highly recommend either. But if you're looking for an audio, this one was good. I have another book where my presuppositions going into it and where my mind was at could have hindered my reading experience. And that is The Hounding. This simply felt, to me, a little too shoulder to shoulder to the Virgin Suicides. And I struggled reading this book because of that. I was reading and I was experiencing these different POVs of these sisters and never getting their actual point of view, and the way that the town sort of turned against them, and the way that this tale was sort of woven around them while never actually including them within it. And also just the pervasive nature of distrust and of community, in a sense. It just felt very, very, very Virgin Suicides. It felt so Virgin Suicides. But if you want a story of some girls who lose themselves and think that they're hounds, give it a shot. If you have read the Virgin Suicides, it could be fun to read something that is sort of comes from that source material. I do not think that I've read anything that specifically says that is what it is doing. I don't know if that was the intent, but also it's too uncanny to not have that as its source material. I don't know. I do not know, but I struggled with it due to that. And I don't know if it's unfair of me to have struggled because of that. I like the writing though. Written well. I like the sort of energy around it, the tone around it. So it was written well. I don't know. If you don't like the Virgin Suicides, you won't like this. So I guess that's another thing to note. Finally, I read the entire Chestnut Spring series. This was a 5-book series. They're contemporary romance. You've got some cowboys and you've got some people that fall in love. All right. It is way more important to me that I give you a ranking of, like, my boyfriend ranking of these books. I sat and stared at this boyfriend ranking for the longest. And even then, like, I'm looking at a couple of names, but I just had to give in. I'm going to start at the bottom of my boyfriend ranking and I'll make my way to my number 1 Chestnut Springs boyfriend. And let me just start at the bottom. Cade. I liked Cade's story and I understand where he's coming from, but there's a couple of things about Cade that just don't work with me. One, I don't want a mean boyfriend. Cade is a bit of an a-hole. He is. That is part of his personality. I do get it, learning how he was raised and like some of the insecurities and how he came up. Like, I understand why Cade is the way that he is. I get it. I don't I don't want my banter with a guy to be sort of tinged in the fact that he's just this grumpy guy. Not for me. I'm also not going to go for a guy with a kid. I'm not going to do that. Me coming in as stepmama. No. So Kate is my bottom. After that comes Jasper. But let me explain myself. The only reason that Jasper is at the bottom, as far at the bottom as he is that story relied so heavily on a couple of their, like, this was a childhood friends to lovers. And the story relied so heavily on a couple of the flashbacks from childhood that I don't feel like I got to know Jasper as an adult. It was so deeply lacking Jasper in the present and knowing who he was today that I couldn't quite build that crush up for him. I love that he was in the bedroom talking crazy, but at the same time, I personally would not crawl on my hands and knees for a man. Spoilers, I guess. Next boyfriend ranking in this series, Bo. Let me explain. I do love Bo. You know what was hard about Bo's story? And this is going to sound so unfair. I had a crush on the Bo that was the chaotic, bubbly golden retriever guy. And it's not fair of me to have lost some of that crush. He's been through a lot. Bo's been through so much. And I'm so glad he's okay and he's dealing with that and he's growing and he's healing and he's found somebody that loves him so deeply. But my crush built for Bo in the original flashes that I would get from him. Bo in the original flashes of this story and in the books, when you would see glimpses of him in other people's books, he was that golden retriever with that chaotic energy, always joking and laughing. And I was excited to get to his book knowing him in that frame of mind. So then when I came to his book and he had been through so much and he was a different person, that's literally what the story is about, him being different than what he used to be. My crush on him started with who he was, though. I wanted that guy so bad. And it's so unfair of me to expect that when he's been through so much. But that's the guy I had a crush on. So, Bo is there. The penultimate of my ranking. Rhett. I liked Rhett. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't stand out. There was nothing I had against him. He could look me in my eyes and talk to me that way that he did. He was on that line of like, there's a little bit, he was satisfying the praise kink while also doing just gentle degradation. Just the gentle, be my dirty little slut, you know? He was never mean. He didn't make you crawl. Jasper lost me in that so much. Like, not to yuck anybody's yum, but I don't know how I would react if a man looked me in my eyes and said, crawl on your hands and knees. I think I would put my shoes on and go home. You know, like, Rhett never really crossed that line. There is a dominance to Rhett, but he wasn't like dom boy. You know what I'm saying? So I liked Rhett. I didn't necessarily have any big, strong feelings about him as a guy, but he could get my draws. Do you see what I'm getting at? Now, in this series, there was only one guy who is like the perfect boyfriend. Theo. I'll argue it any day. Theo is the best of the boyfriend material in this series. His patience, his kindness, his understanding, how much of a golden retriever he was, how big his heart was. And then his filthy mouth. There was such a softness and kindness to Theo. And again, that patience and just how serving he was. Like the way that his love language is so deeply acts of service was just so hot. Theo was the perfect boyfriend out of this series. The perfect boyfriend out of this series. So that's my ranking from person that I wouldn't necessarily date to the best boyfriend of this series. We have Cade, Jasper, Beau, Rhett, Theo. And I do think I want to lock that in. I do think I stand by that deeply. And that is all I have for you. I'm literally about to edit this. It is currently 5 a.m. And I have a tattoo scheduled at 11. Oh, this day is gonna hurt so bad. Like not the tattoo, but just like my sleep schedule is such trash. I hope that you've been reading good books. If you've read any of these, please let me know. Please let me know your thoughts. Please give me your boyfriend ranking if you've read the Chestnut Springs series. And of all the books that I've read, of all these 19, Knock Knock Open Wide is the one that, like, if I had to beg you to go to the library or go to the library and put one on hold, or go to Libby and put one on hold, it's Knock Knock Open Wide. But I need to edit and I need to get 2 hours of sleep before I get a tattoo today. But I'm going to talk to you next time.